For years, a 22LR has been the go-to for small game hunters and pest control. Its small size, coupled with incredibly cheap price per round and incredibly massive gun selection, has naturally led it to be a favorite for going after game that requires much smaller calibers. I mean, sure, there exist a few other small rimfire calibers like 22 Winchester rimfire or 17 HM2. However, acquiring those two calibers is not always the most easy of tasks, made worse by the fact that a considerable amount of people cannot be bothered to order ammo online for some reason. However, with all the benefits of the 22LR, there lies one main issue with the design of the bullet, an issue that, although for years didn't really matter, is now starting to matter at least on a small scale with the increasing number of areas banning the use of lead for hunting or just plinking on public land. And this issue is something that Winchester is now attempting to solve with their brand new cartridge released just last year on September 18th of 2024. What's up guys, Scipio here and welcome back to another Cartridge Week episode, this week featuring a rather new caliber that at the time of this video's recording hasn't even reached a year of age yet, the brand new 21 Sharps. Now before we get into all the info on this brand new caliber, we'll first do what we always do and take a look at the head stamp, which we can see just one marking, something very typical for rimfires, and that's a 21, signifying the caliber 21 Sharps, which although it's common for rimfires to have just one marking or none at all, it's actually fairly uncommon for that marking to be the caliber. Usually the marking seen on rimfires just signifies the manufacturer. Anyways, as stated, the 21 Sharps is incredibly new, having released barely a year ago, so at the time of making this video, there really isn't that much information on it. I mean, there isn't even a Wikipedia page for the caliber if you just want to do a quick read, which I'll add is definitely quite impressive and that this has to be a first for going over cartridges on this channel. Now naturally, a caliber seeking to replace a 22LR for nearly any market that the 22LR does well in is going to be fighting the most difficult of uphill battles. I mean, perhaps the best example of a cartridge that was designed to replace the 22 in something was the 25 ACP, which we have gone over already, and I'll leave a link in the description for the whole story. Anyways, as mentioned, the 25 ACP was designed to replace the 22LR in pocket pistols and sported a very good reason given that rimfire is not as reliable as centerfire. Now the idea was to create a very similar cartridge to 22LR, as 22LR at the time was much too small to have a conventional centerfire primer, so the casing was upsized just a bit, giving us a 25 caliber projectile. And this new caliber certainly did take off in popularity and take up some of the market that was originally solely dominated by 22s. However, despite its advantages, it would not come close to completely kicking the 22LR out of the pocket pistol market, and in fact, for the most part, it itself would eventually be kicked out of the pocket pistol market by the 22LR. I mean, they're still releasing 22LR pocket pistols, whereas honestly, I'm actually not sure what the newest 25 ACP pistol was. Closest thing I can think of were those cheap Phoenix Arms pistols that they made in both 22LR and 25 ACP. Anyways, all that being said, this demonstrates that although a specific cartridge can do something or just be in general a little bit better than another, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be successful in totally replacing the 22LR in whatever market the 22 dominates. And this begs the question, what exact demand does a 21 Sharps seek to fulfill that the 22LR cannot? The purpose of the 21 Sharps is to allow for lead-free cartridge options that are much easier to load than the original 22. As mentioned, the 22 is an incredibly popular hunting caliber for small game, and certain places have begun implementing bans on lead projectiles, causing hunters to have to go with lead-free bullet options. Now, lead-free bullets are nothing new. They've existed for quite a good time and are fairly commonly available for practically any caliber you can think of. The problem, at least according to Winchester, is that it is difficult to make a lead-free 22LR, given the cartridge usage of a healed bullet, which if you weren't aware, the 22LR uses an old design of bullet where some of the bullet sits inside the casing and then the bullet widens above the case and sits on top of the case, essentially becoming the exact diameter of the casing. Originally, many bullets were loaded this way due to ease of manufacture, and while most all cartridges using these style of bullets would fade away, the 22LR, given its popularity, would be one of the few sporting healed bullets to stick around. The problem, according to Winchester, is that it is difficult to create a lead-free healed bullet, and as such, they become more costly to produce. According to Winchester, by simply reducing the diameter of 22LR from 0.223 to 0.2105, or essentially just the same casing but eliminating the healed bullet portion, and going for a more conventional bullet, they can load lead-free bullets much more easily and as such drive down costs, which again, their idea is to make a box of lead-free 21 Sharps cost just as much as a box of normal 22LR, or at least come very close to it. Now so far they don't seem to have really accomplished their goal, though one thing to keep in mind is that yes, the ammunition costs considerably more than 22LR, however, it's still a new caliber that hasn't really picked up traction yet, and every new caliber, even 22LR back when it was introduced, tends to be priced pricier on release versus much later. However, this nonetheless does present the 21 Sharps with the first major hurdle, and that being, what justification is there to buy a whole new rifle in a new, fairly rare caliber that sports the same price, if not more, per round than your 22LR? Because while it's difficult to do, there are still lead-free options for the 22LR, and while they may be more pricey than standard lead options, they are nowhere near pricey enough for the majority of people to justify replacing their 22LR guns. And especially considering, again, for the time being, the 21 Sharps isn't exactly cheap at the moment. However, with this, Winchester claims the cartridge has other benefits over the 22LR, such as greater accuracy, and at first, this looks like something that would make sense when you consider the more aerodynamic shape of the bullet with the 21 Sharps. However, as it turns out, the 21 Sharps, when using similar bullet weights, doesn't really perform any better than the 22LR. I mean, there is an argument to be made that it might be the quality of the guns used in the test, as there's a wide array of just really good 22 rifles, whereas there's really only a small handful of 21 Sharps rifles currently available, and so far of the currently available guns, there's only two companies making them, Winchester and Savage. And there's also another argument to be made that in regards to ammo selection, so far there's only 4 different bullet options, and they're all manufactured by Winchester, so it definitely is in the realm of reason to suggest that the caliber might see greater accuracy if it were to be produced by a more high-end ammo manufacturer. Now, we had mentioned that gun selection for this caliber is not entirely vast, with Winchester and Savage being the only two makers of guns chambered for this caliber currently, and between the two there exist only 12 different rifles, all of which are bolt action. In theory, however, since the caliber is essentially just a 22LR with a smaller bullet, you could simply rebarrel any gun originally made for 22LR to the new 21 Sharps, and the gun would work just fine. And it has been demonstrated to be fully capable of running semi-automatic actions, so you wouldn't be limited to just bolt actions like what is currently only available for the caliber. You are, however, limited on whether or not you can find a new barrel for whichever platform you seek to convert, and even more so, you'll likely end up having to pay to have a custom-made barrel made. To which, on top of that, unless your gun has some sort of quick-change barrel, you'll also be having to pay a gunsmith to swap out barrels on your gun. And remember that you'd be doing all this and paying all that money for a cartridge that at the end of the day really offers absolutely nothing over the 22LR that you'd be replacing. I mean, when you think about it, it's actually kind of astonishing that Winchester thought that this was a good idea in the first place. I mean, the whole lead-free problem isn't really much of a problem to begin with, and it certainly isn't close to being as big a problem to justify a whole new cartridge. In fact, it's even more astonishing when you realize that Winchester actually already has a caliber similar to the 22LR that doesn't use a heeled bullet, so-called the 22 Winchester rimfire. I mean, they really could have just attempted to rebrand the caliber, and given there already exists a decent amount of guns in the caliber already, you could at least have had minor success selling the ammo to people with the guns already, should anyone buy no new made guns for the cartridge. Which, I mean, again, you would still be fighting an honestly losing battle, but at least you could make something back as opposed to really nothing that they're going to be making with this cartridge and its respective guns. Now, with that being said, I personally see the 21 Sharps really being a dead-on-arrival caliber. I mean, it's set out to answer a question that no one was really asking to begin with, and it doesn't really do anything better than the cartridge it intends to replace. In some fields like accuracy, it actually has been seen to do a lot worse. However, with that being said, there will still be people that will purchase these rifles, and years later, when Winchester ultimately abandons the cartridge, like I feel they will do, this will undoubtedly provide for some very cheap rifles in the near future, seeing that not many people will want a gun that they cannot get ammo for. And this actually presents us with a rather unique question for the caliber. When these guns undoubtedly become super cheap, would there be a reason to, say, save $100 buying one of these over a 22LR? And this isn't really a question for the common shooter, but rather people like myself who honestly have zero issue in getting ammo that's no longer sold and don't really mind having to go a few extra steps when reloading for a particular gun. Now, from the get-go, if you wanted to reload, or rather just load the 21 Sharps, you can't really reload rimfire, you have a lot of great things going for you. I mean, you really would only need to take a 22LR cartridge and pull the existing .223 diameter heeled bullet and replace it with a non-heeled .2105 diameter bullet. I mean, I imagine powder charges would really just be the same. You may have to experiment with those, but for all intents and purposes, let's just assume that our only issue is the bullet. How common are bullets of this weird .2105 diameter size? Well, from what I can see, they just flat out don't exist, and the 21 Sharp so far is the only cartridge that uses the bullet of this diameter. Now, this in and of itself isn't a complete stop, however. It just means you're going to have to get creative with your loading now. The easiest option you could attempt would be to get a sizer or a few to gradually step the bullet down from a bullet that's closest in diameter and shares weights and lengths that would match the original 21 Sharp's loadings, which I think it would be a stretch, but it might be possible to do with a .223 or .224 diameter bullets. If those prove to be impossible to size down to the correct size, you still aren't completely completely dead in the water, as you could always just get a custom mold and cast your own lead bullets. Because remember, you are essentially still kind of running a 22, and as we all know, 22 LR is very much able to work with lead bullets. Which I will add is kind of ironic that the first two easiest options involved using lead for a caliber that was not really intended to use lead. I mean, they do make lead options, but the original intention of the caliber was lead-free options. However, should you wish to have a lead-free bullet, you could always probably lathe your own, though that is certainly the most extreme way to get the ammo that most people don't really have access to. I mean, I know I myself do not own a lathe. However, as we can see, unlike certain calibers that for one reason or another actually become like impossible or just really hard to make, the 21 Sharps doesn't really appear to have that issue, and I think it's kind of funny that the only thing that might end up justifying the purchase of a rifle chambered in this cartridge would be because no one else wants it in the first place. Again, this sounds really weird to the average shooter, but you have weirdos like myself that'll buy a 6.5 by 52mm Carcano just because the gun is like $150. So now with all that being said, this is still a very newly made cartridge, and while I feel we can reliably predict that it will not be around for long, that is not to say that it won't find any sort of saving grace in the near future. Now currently, as we have stated numerous times, there doesn't really exist much info on the caliber. I mean, as stated, this thing hasn't been around for a full year yet. However, we can at least get a general idea of the overall specs of the cartridge. As previously stated, the 21 Sharps utilizes the exact same casing from the 22 LR and is topped off with a .2105 diameter conventional non-heeled bullet. There currently exists 4 different options as far as bullet selection is concerned, with there being a 34 grain jacketed hollow point, a 25 grain solid copper flat nose, a 42 grain full metal jacket, and a 37 grain black copper plated lead bullet. Velocities between the 4 currently available options vary. However, on the low end with heavier bullets, they sport a velocity of around 1,330 feet per second, or on the high end, utilizing lighter bullets, we can see velocities of around 1,750 feet per second. But anyways, I think that's going to do it for this week's Cartridge Week episode featuring the very new, very cool looking 21 Sharps. I hope y'all enjoy the video as much as I personally enjoyed making it, and I will see y'all next time.